I was underneath a 2010 Ford Explorer, covered in a film of grease and satisfaction. When my phone buzzed, you know that feeling when the complex mechanics of an engine make more sense than your own family? That was my entire life in a nutshell. My garage wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every wrench, every lift, every single oil stain on the concrete floor, I'd earned it. I built this place from nothing, with my own two hands, while my family was busy building a narrative where I was just the reliable one, the backup plan, the walking wallet. I rolled out, wiped my hands on a rag, and picked up my phone. It was an email from my mom. Linda. The subject line read, "Big 40th anniversary plans, complete with a champagne bottle emoji." My mom's version of subtlety. I smiled, thinking she was finally organizing the party I'd offered to pay for. A nice, respectable dinner for family and friends. A testament to 40 years of marriage. Then I opened it. It wasn't a plan. It was a list. A list of demands disguised as a wish list. There were 3 bullet points. First, a 10-day, all-inclusive trip to the Maldives. Business class tickets. Of course. Your father has always wanted to see the ocean from an overwater bungalow. Second, a new luxury sedan for your father. The lease on his current one is ending, and he deserves something that reflects his status. His status as a retired man whose son paid all his bills. And third, the diamond necklace from Tiffany's we saw last month. A small token to celebrate 40 years. I had to read it 3 times. Not because it was complicated, but because my brain refused to process that level of audacity. A small token. The necklace alone was $20,000. The car, another $60,000. The trip, I didn't even want to calculate it. This wasn't a wish list. This was a ransom note. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice sickeningly cheerful. "Michael, did you see my email? Isn't it exciting?" I tried to keep my voice even. "Mom, I saw it." "What? What is this?" "It's our list, sweetie, for the party. Instead of a bunch of small gifts from everyone, we figured it would be easier if you just handled the big-ticket items for us. It's so much more efficient." Efficient. That was the word she used. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. "Mom, this list it's over $100,000. Are you serious?" Her cheerful tone curdled instantly. "Of course. I'm serious. Michael, it's our 40th anniversary. It's a milestone. After everything we've done for you, this is the bare minimum." Everything they'd done for me. I thought of the community college I put myself through, while my dad invested my college fund in one of my sister Jessica's failed Etsy stores. I thought of the countless loans I'd given them that were never paid back. The credit card bills I'd covered. The mortgage payments I secretly made when they fell on hard times. The bare minimum, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I offered to throw you a party. A nice one. This is not a party. This is you treating me like a lottery. I just won." And then came the line. The one that severed a cord I didn't even know was still attached. "Honestly, Michael," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "we have to show our faces to our friends, to our family. If you can't do this for us, if you show up with nothing after all your success, you'd be a disgrace. An embarrassment to us all. A disgrace. For not buying them a 6-figure vacation package after I'd spent 20 years keeping them afloat." The irony was so thick, I could have used it to patch a tire. Something inside me didn't just break, it turned to ice. "Okay, Mom," I said, and my voice was unnervingly calm. "I understand perfectly." "Good. So you'll start making the arrangements." "Oh. I'm going to make an arrangement." "All right," I said. "Talk to you later." I hung up before she could reply. I stood there in the quiet of my garage, the smell of motor oil and hard work filling my lungs. An embarrassment. A disgrace. For years, I had swallowed their insults, their dismissiveness, their casual cruelty. I had paid for their lifestyle while they patted my sister on the back for simply existing. I had built a life for myself not because of them, but in spite of them, and it still wasn't enough. I walked over to my desk and pulled out the folder labeled Garage Expansion. Inside were the blueprints for a bigger, better facility. A dream I'd been saving for. Putting off? Because there was always another bill to pay for them. Another emergency that needed my money. I looked at the demands on my phone, then back at the blueprints. And for the first time in my life, the choice was not just clear. It was easy. They wanted me to save them from embarrassment. Fine. But I was going to do it on my own terms. And they weren't going to like it one bit. You might be wondering why I didn't just walk away sooner. Why it took a demand for a trip to the Maldives to finally snap. The truth is, you don't notice the weight of a chain when it's been put on you one link at a time. Over 20 years. For me, the first link was forged the summer I turned 18. I had a letter of acceptance to a good engineering school. I wasn't a genius, but I was good with my hands. Good with systems. I wanted to build things. My dad, Robert, had promised the college fund was ready. Then came the family meeting. My sister, Jessica, who was 21 at the time, had her newest brilliant idea on online boutique for artisanal, handcrafted Yevelry. She'd made a business plan on a napkin. My dad called it Vision. 4 weeks later, my college fund was gone. Dad said it was a bad investment that didn't pan out. But I knew. He'd given it all to Jessica. When I confronted him, he told me, Jessica is a creative. She needs capital to fly. You, Michael, you've always been practical. You'll land on your feet. I did land on my feet. I landed hard on the greasy concrete floor of a local auto shop, working 60 hours a week as an apprentice. I put my engineering dreams on a shelf and learned how to rebuild transmissions instead. And you know what? I was good at it. I loved it. Within 5 years, I'd saved enough to open my own small, 2-bay garage. I was proud. I thought they'd be proud, too. Instead, my success became their solution. The more money I made, the more emergencies they had. It started small. Michael, can you cover the country club dues this month? Your father has important networking to do. Then it was Jessica's next venture. After the jewelry boutique failed, she decided to become a certified life coach. She needed $20,000 for the certification course in Bali. I paid for it. She came back with a great tan and 0 clients. Then came the artisanal candle business, the organic dog treat bakery. Each failure was cushioned by my success. Each a new invoice sent directly to the bank of Michael. Me parents' lifestyle never wavered. They drove new cars, took weekend trips, and hosted dinner parties where they'd talk about Jessica's entrepreneurial spirit. They never mentioned my garage. It was the unspoken secret. The dirty engine that powered their clean, shiny lives. I was the reliable, practical son, the one who didn't need praise. Just an occasional pat on the head while they reached for my wallet. Love in my family wasn't a feeling, it was a transaction. My role was to provide. Their role was to receive. And Jessica's role was to be the reason for it all. It wasn't until I was reading an article online one night, trying to distract myself after another $5,000 loan to Jessica, that it all clicked into place. I stumbled upon this concept in family psychology called assigned roles. It turns out, what happened in my family wasn't random. It was a script. In some families, especially unhealthy ones, members get unconsciously assigned parts to play to keep the system balanced. But there's the hero or the golden child, the one who carries all the hopes, gets all the praise, and is the pride of the family. That was Jessica. Her job was to have big dreams and look good on the Christmas card. But to balance that, there often has to be a scapegoat, the one who carries the burdens, takes the blame, and exist to make the hero shine brighter. The scapegoat is also a very convenient place for parents to dump their own disappointments and financial anxieties. That was me. My role wasn't just to be the mechanic, it was to be the silent, uncomplaining financial engine that funded their perfect family portrait. My hard work didn't make them proud, it made them comfortable. It enabled them to continue pretending they were successful, to continue coddling the daughter, who was their vision of success, while the son, who actually was a success, was treated like a utility. And the article said that escaping that role isn't just about moving out or saying no. It's a rebellion against the entire script that was written for your life. It's the act of tearing up your assigned part, and finally writing your own. So, when my mother's email came through, demanding cars and diamonds and trips to the Maldives, I saw it for what it was. It wasn't just a list of gifts. It was a casting call. A reminder of the role I was expected to play. Forever. And for the first time, I decided to refuse the part. Refusing the part was one thing. Now I had to burn down the theater. He sat at me desk. The glow of the monitor washing over the grease on my hands that never quite scrubbed off. For 20 years, my default setting had been accommodate. Accommodate their needs. Their moods. Their endless, bottomless expectations. My entire life was a negotiation. I was always losing. But the thing about hitting rock bottom is that you finally have a solid place to push off from. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't write a long, emotional letter. I didn't list my grievances or rehash 2 decades of being treated like an afterthought. They didn't deserve an explanation. Explanations are for people who are willing to listen. My family only ever listened for the sound of my wallet opening. So I kept it short. Clinical. Final. I opened a new email. Addressed it to my mom, my dad, and Jessica. The subject line was just one word: update. The body was just 3 sentences. The anniversary party is canceled. All financial support will cease. Effective immediately. Happy 40th anniversary. I hit send before the fear could talk me out of it. And then, I watched the storm roll in. It took less than 60 seconds. The first text was from Jessica. A simple question mark? Followed by, LOL, what is this email? Is this a joke? She thought it was a joke. Of course she did. In her world, the Bank of Michael never closed. Then my phone screen lit up with Mom calling. I stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The old Michael would have answered. Ready to be screamed at. Ready to apologize for a crime he didn't commit just to make the noise stop. The new Michael pressed the silence button on the side of his phone and watched it go to voicemail. A second later, the notification popped up. I listened to it. Her voice was a shrill, panicked shriek. Michael, you call me back this instant. What is the meaning of this? How dare you? After everything we have done for you. You pull a stunt like this. You are selfish. You are an ungrateful child. I deleted it. Another text. This time from my dad. Robert. It was exactly what I expected. Cold. Commanding. And dripping with patriarchal rage. You will answer my calls. This is not a request. I put the phone face down on the desk. Every buzz, every vibration was a hook. An attempt to pull me back into their chaotic orbit of drama and entitlement. For years, I had let them. My desire for their approval, for a crumb of the affection they showered on Jessica, had been my weakness. They knew it. And they used it like a weapon. But something was different now. That disgrace comment hadn't just hurt me, it had cauterized the wound. It had burned away that last, desperate shred of hope that they would ever see me as anything more than a resource. My phone buzzed again. And again. A call from Jessica. A text from Mom. Your father is furious. Another from Dad. I am on my way over there. He was bluffing. He hadn't known the address of my last garage for 3 years. I stood up and walked over to my filing cabinet. I ignored the incessant buzzing on the desk. I pulled out the drawer labeled Dreams, a cheesy name I'd given it one late night. But it was true. Inside was the thick folder for my garage expansion, the blueprints I'd agonized over, the financial projections, the list of potential properties I'd been scouting for months. Thinking I was years away from making it a reality, I spread the papers out on my workbench, right next to a half-disassembled carburetor, my past and my future, lying side by side. I could stay in this small garage forever, slowly being bled dry by my family until there was nothing left of me or my business. Or I could take the money I was no longer pouring into their black hole of a life and bet on myself. For the first time, I could bet on myself. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. One of their relatives. No doubt. Recruited for the guilt campaign. I declined the call and then did something that felt more liberating than sending the email. I powered the phone off completely. Silence. It was glorious. I picked up the property listings. There was one in particular I'd been circling for weeks. A 5,000 square foot commercial space on the industrial side of town. More space than I needed right now. But not more than I could grow into. The rent was steep, but without my family's monthly allowance. It was suddenly possible. My hands were steady as I picked up my desk phone. The old landline I kept for the business. I dialed the number for the real estate agent. A woman with a professional voice answered. Commercial properties. This is Sarah. Hi. Sarah, I said, and a slow smile spread across my face. My name is Michael. I'm calling about the listing on Peterson Avenue. Yes. The 5,000 square foot one. I'd like to schedule a viewing. As soon as possible. She checked her calendar. I have an opening tomorrow at 10. I'll be there, I said. And Sarah, I'm ready to move on it immediately. I hung up the phone and looked around my small garage. This place had been my sanctuary. The first thing I had ever truly built for myself. Now, it was about to become my launching pad. The storm was still raging somewhere out there. On a phone I'd turned off. In a world I was choosing to leave behind. But in here, for the first time in a long time, it was finally quiet. And it was the sound of a new beginning. The anger was predictable. I was prepared for it. What I wasn't prepared for was the pivot. When the shouting and the threats didn't work. My family did what they do best. They weaponized guilt. The campaign started subtly. On Monday, I turned my phone back on. Not to engage, but to have a record. The storm of angry messages had been replaced by a deafening silence. Then, a new text came through from an unknown number. It was a picture. Me. Around 10 years old. Grinning with a missing front tooth. Holding up a ridiculously oversized wrench next to my dad in the driveway. I remembered that day. I had helped him change the oil in my mom's old station wagon. The caption, from my mom, read, "Remember when we were a happy family. I miss my sweet, helpful boy." My heart gave a painful twist. That was the boy I'd been my whole life, the helpful one. The one who fixed things. But looking at that photo, I realized the lie. I wasn't being helpful. I was being trained. Trained to be the one who takes care of everything. The one who asks for nothing in return. My sweetness was my utility. I deleted the picture. Next came Jessica. Her texts were masterpieces of passive aggression. Mom hasn't stopped crying for 2 days. One read, "Dad isn't sleeping. I know you're angry. But whatever this is, it's tearing the family apart." She was trying to make me the villain. I wasn't the one who had spent years exploiting a family member. I was the one who had finally stopped letting it happen. The problem wasn't that I was tearing the family apart. The problem was that their ATM was finally out of service. And they didn't know how to function. The grand finale of their guilt tour was a phone call from my Aunt Carol. She's my mom's sister. The family's designated mediator, whose version of mediating was to always side with my mother. "Michael. Honey," she began, her voice thick with fake concern. "Your mother is just heartbroken. We're all so worried about you. Whatever is going on. You know you can't just turn your back on your family." "Aunt Carol," I said. keeping my voice level and calm. I appreciate you calling. But this is a private matter between me and my parents. But they love you so much, she insisted. Linda is just beside herself. She thinks she's done something to push you away. The sheer audacity of that statement almost made me laugh. She thinks she might have done something. Did she happen to mention the six-figure gift list she sent me for her anniversary? There was a pause. Well, she said, you two had a misunderstanding about the budget. A misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it. I wasn't a son who had been insulted and dismissed. I was just a contractor who had misunderstood the budget. There was no misunderstanding. Aunt Carol, I said, the ice creeping back into my voice. And I'm not discussing it further. I have to go. I hung up before she could launch into another pre-written speech about the sanctity of family. That night, I almost caved. The weight of their combined disappointment, the lifetime of training to be the good son. It was all pressing down on me. I found myself driving to the old garage of a man named Frank. The guy who had first taught me how to work on cars. He was retired now. A gruff old bear, of a man who communicated mostly in grunts, but who knew more about engines than anyone I'd ever met. I found him in his woodshop, smelling of sawdust and coffee. I didn't even have to say much. I just told him about the party, the list, and the phone calls. He listened, sanding a piece of wood, not looking at me. When I was done, he switched off the sander, blew the dust off the wood, and looked me dead in the eye. Let me get this straight. He grunted. You've been their personal bank for 20 years. You finally say no. And they're calling you the bad guy. Basically, I said, feeling a little foolish. He shook his head and let out a short, harsh laugh. Kid, they ain't treating you like a son. They're treating you like a faulty ATM. They're trying to smack back into service. You're not cutting them off. You're cutting your losses. There's a difference. And just like that, the guilt vanished. He was right. It wasn't my job to manage their feelings about my boundaries. It wasn't my responsibility to light myself on fire to keep them warm. Frank just nodded, clapped me on the shoulder with a dusty hand, and went back to his sanding. That was all I needed. The next morning, I met with the real estate agent, Sarah. We walked through the empty 5,000 square foot space. It was a dusty, cavernous shell. But all I could see was potential. I could see the lifts, the tool chests, the customer waiting area with actual comfortable chairs. I could see my future. It's a big step up, Sarah said. Are you sure you're ready? As she spoke, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was another text from my mom. Another picture from the past. Me at my high school graduation, looking awkward in a cap and gown. The caption, so much potential. I hope you find your way back to us. Find my way back. I was never lost. I was just finally on my own road. I put the phone away, looked at Sarah, and smiled. I'm more than ready, I said. Where do I sign? That afternoon, I sat in her clean, quiet office. A lease agreement spread out on the table in front of me. My signature wasn't just ink on a page. It was a declaration of independence. It was the sound of a foundation being laid. My foundation, built on my terms. Far away from the sinking ship of their expectations. I signed my name. And I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a blur of concrete dust, drywall, and the surprisingly satisfying smell of fresh paint. Every day, I was at the new site from sunrise to long after sunset. For the first time, I wasn't just fixing things other people had broken. I was building something from the ground up. My foundation, my future. The silence from my family had been a gift. A clean slate I was using to draw my own blueprint. I should have known it wouldn't last. It was a Tuesday afternoon. About a month after I'd signed the lease. I was on a ladder, installing new LED bay lights, when a familiar car pulled into the dusty lot. My mother's luxury sedan, the one I'd made the last 3 payments on before cutting the cord. I felt a familiar dread coil in my stomach. They got out of the car. My father, Robert, and my mother, Linda. They didn't look angry anymore. They looked smaller, defeated. My father's usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, and he stared at the half-finished building with a grim, hollow expression. My mother's eyes were puffy and red-rimmed. Her usual pristine composure completely gone. They looked like strangers who had wandered onto the wrong property. I climbed down from the ladder, my work boots crunching on the dusty concrete. "What are you doing here?" I asked. There was no warmth in my voice. Linda wrung her hands, looking around at the exposed beams and stacks of building materials. Her gaze wasn't proud, it was assessing, calculating. "Michael, this is quite the place," she said, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation. "You have all this, while we have nothing. It's a work in progress," I said flatly. "What do you want?" That's when the performance began. Linda's eyes welled up with practiced tears. "We're in trouble, Michael," she whispered, as if sharing a terrible secret. "Real trouble." I just stared, waiting. I'd seen this show before. It always started with tears and ended with a price tag. "It's the house," she choked out. "The bank, they sent a letter. A final notice." She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "They're going to take the house. Michael, the house you grew up in." She delivered the line like it was a killing blow. The ultimate emotional trump card. The house I grew up in. The house where I was taught that my worth was conditional. The house where my dreams were dismissed while my sisters were funded. That house. I felt nothing. And I asked. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was gravelly. "Impatient. Your mother is trying to say that we need your help." He gestured around the vast, empty space of my new garage. "You have this. This is an asset. We made some bad decisions. Got some bad advice. You spent money you didn't have to impress people you don't like." I cut in. "That's not bad advice. That's just you." He ignored me, his jaw tightening. "We need you to do your duty as a son." There it was. Duty. The word they only ever used when they wanted something. My duty was to provide. My duty was to be silent. My duty was to exist as their safety net. "What duty is that?" "Dad," I asked, crossing my arms. He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a tone of command. "You will go to the bank. You will take out a loan against this business. And you will give us the money to pay off what we owe. It's that simple." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of it was breathtaking. I looked from his stern, demanding face to my mother's tear-streaked, manipulative one. They hadn't driven here to apologize. They hadn't come to reconnect. They had come to collect. They saw my dream, my hard work, my future, and they saw a solution to their problem. They saw a resource to be liquidated. A sound escaped my lips. It was a laugh. A short, sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "Let me get this straight," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. After decades of treating me like a second-class citizen, after dismissing my career, after demanding a $100,000 gift, you show up at the business I built without you. And you demand that I risk all of it to bail you out of a mess you made. Is that the situation? "We are your parents," Linda cried. As if that explained everything. "You owe us this. We gave you life. You gave me life." "Sure," I shot back, the ice in my voice, now sharp enough to cut. "But you gave Jessica a blank check. Funded by me. You gave yourselves a lifestyle you couldn't afford. Funded by me. You gave me lectures on being responsible while you were drowning in debt. Don't you dare talk to me about what I owe." My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "You ungrateful." But it was Linda who delivered the final, desperate blow. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "We are your parents," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a mix of desperation and fury. "Without us, you would be nothing. You have a responsibility." I pulled my arm away from her grasp. "No," I said, my voice cold and final. "You had a responsibility, and you failed." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and irreversible. The silence was broken only by the sound of my mother's ragged sobs. But just as my father opened his mouth to unleash the tirade I knew was coming, a different sound cut through the tension. It was my phone, ringing in my pocket. I almost ignored it. But something about the timing, the sheer cosmic irony of it, made me pull it out. The caller ID was a name I recognized, but one I never expected to hear from. It was my bank manager. I almost ignored it. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to let my father's impending tirade be the final sound of our relationship. But I saw the name on the screen, David Henderson, my bank manager, a man who only ever called for two reasons: a problem or an opportunity. A strange, cold premonition washed over me. I answered. "David," I said, my voice steady. "Michael, sorry to bother you on site," he said, his tone all business. "I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. We're doing a routine review on a commercial loan that's become problematic. I needed to speak with you directly." I frowned, glancing at my parents. They were watching me. Their own drama momentarily paused. "A loan? I haven't taken out any new loans, David. We just have the mortgage on this place." "No, not you personally," he clarified. "The loan is under your father's name, Robert, from last year. But it's the collateral that we needed to discuss. It's a bit of an unusual situation." The air in the garage suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. My father's face had gone pale. "What collateral?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a rustle of papers on the other end of the line. "Yes. According to the paperwork your father filed, the primary collateral listed for his $200,000 business loan is..." And I'm reading this directly. "Michael's Auto Repair Incorporated." The world went quiet. The sound of my mother's sniffling, my father's heavy breathing, the distant hum of the lights, it all faded away. All I could hear was David Henderson's voice, calmly and professionally detonating my entire life. "Michael, are you still there?" I couldn't form words. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. $200,000. "Mr. Henderson," I finally managed to say, my throat tight. That can't be right. I never signed anything." "Well, that's the unusual part," he said. "Your father had power of attorney for you, in a family trust, years ago. And it seems the paperwork was pushed through, using that. It's an old clause. Should have been flagged. But frankly, it slipped past our legal team. Regardless, the contract is binding. We've been trying to reach your father for weeks. He's defaulted on the last 3 payments. We're legally obligated to inform the owner of the collateral, that's you, that we are beginning the process of asset seizure." Asset seizure. The words hit me like a physical blow. The lifts, the diagnostic machines, the tools I'd spent a decade accumulating. This building, my foundation. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice a hollow echo of itself. "I understand." I hung up the phone. The rage I felt moments before was gone. In its place was something colder, heavier, a certainty. The kind of clarity you get right after a car crash, when the world moves in slow motion and you can see every shard of broken glass. I turned to my parents. They were staring at me. Their expressions, a mixture of fear and pathetic hope. They knew what that call was about. I walked toward them slowly. $200,000, I said, letting each word hang in the air like a death sentence. My mother flinched. I looked at my father. You took out a $200,000 loan. And you used my company, my life's work, as collateral. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face, which had been red with anger just minutes before, was now a pasty, sickly gray. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at a spot on the floor. A drop of oil I'd missed. Anything but his son's eyes. My mother started sobbing again. But these weren't the manipulative tears from before. This was the sound of someone who had been caught. Truly and completely. We were going to pay it back. Michael, she whimpered. We just needed a little help to get started. Your father's consulting business. What consulting business? I snapped. He hasn't worked in 5 years. You were paying for your golf memberships and your shopping trips. You were funding Jessica's fantasy life. There was no business. It was all a lie. And then I understood. The whole ugly picture came into focus. The absurd gift list wasn't a wish list. It was a desperate, harebrained scheme to get a sudden infusion of cash to make a loan payment. Their visit today. The tears. The act, it wasn't a plea for help. It was a confession. They hadn't come here to ask me to jump onto their sinking ship. They had come to tell me they'd already chained me to the anchor. I looked at the man who was my father. This stranger, who had gambled my future without a second thought. And the woman who was my mother, who had stood by and let him. The people who claimed I would be a disgrace. Get out, I said. My voice was quiet, almost conversational. But it carried a weight that made them both freeze. Linda looked up, her face a mess of tears and confusion. What? Get out, I repeated, pointing toward the door. Get out of my building. Now. My father finally looked at me. A flicker of his old, belligerent anger returning. You can't talk to us like that. I am still your father. No. I cut him off. The coldness in my voice, finally hardening into steel. You are the man who tried to ruin me to save himself. That doesn't make you a father. It makes you a liability. And I am done with liabilities. They just stood there, stunned into silence. By this version of me they had never seen before. The helpful boy was gone. The walking wallet was empty. The scapegoat had just refused to be sacrificed. Now, I said, taking a step toward them. And for the first time in his life, my father took a step back. They left. I didn't watch them go. But I heard the sound of their car spitting gravel as it sped out of the lot. Then, silence. A heavy, ringing silence that was louder than my mother's screaming. I stood there in the middle of my half-built dream, which now felt like a crime scene. The shaking didn't start until about a minute later. It began in my hands and spread through my whole body. A violent tremor born of shock and a rage so profound, it felt like it was going to tear me apart from the inside. This wasn't just anger. Anger is hot. It's loud. This was cold. It was the chilling, absolute certainty that the two people in the world who were supposed to protect me had been the ones holding the knife all along. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. My apartment felt tainted. A place paid for by a man who didn't know he was being robbed, blind by his own blood. Instead, I stayed in the garage. I found an old, dusty sleeping bag left by one of the contractors and laid it out on the cold concrete floor, right where the main service bay would be. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark. The cavernous space around me lit only by the faint glow of a single security light outside. I thought about the phone call. $200,000. An amount so large, so absurd, that it felt like a number from a different reality. But it was my reality. They had tied a $200,000 anchor to my leg. And for the last year, I'd been happily swimming toward the surface, completely unaware. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and walked to the small, makeshift office I'd set up in the corner. I unlocked my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder for Michael's Auto Repair Incorporated. My incorporation documents, my business license, My financial statements from the past 5 years, showing slow, steady, hard-won growth. I spread them out on the floor under the bare bulb of a work light. Page after page of my life. Late nights, boosted knuckles, skipped vacations, every dollar saved, every sacrifice made. It was all there, in black and white. Proof that I had built this. Me. Not them. And they had taken it. Taken the name on this paperwork. My name. And signed it over as a guarantee for a fantasy life they hadn't earned. That's when the enlightenment hit. It wasn't a flash of lightning. It was a slow, dawning horror. They didn't see me as their son. They never had. A son is someone you nurture. You protect. You build up. I was an asset. I was an insurance policy. My success wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource to be tapped. A line of credit they felt entitled to. My love for them. My sense of duty. It wasn't a bond, it was collateral. And the worst part, the part that gnawed at my insides until I felt physically sick, I had let them. For 20 years. I had kept quiet. I mistook my silence for patience. I called it keeping the peace. But it wasn't peace. It was complicity. Every time I paid a bill, every time I wrote a check, I was teaching them that their actions had no consequences. I was funding my own destruction. My silence wasn't a shield, it was an invitation. There in the cold, dusty darkness of my own garage, the helpful boy finally died. The scapegoat, the walking wallet, the good son who just wanted his parents to be proud, he was gone. And the man who was left was someone I barely recognized. He was cold. He was clear-eyed. And he was done. There would be no more working it out. There would be no more family discussions. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be solved with a tearful apology over Sunday dinner. This was a hostile takeover. And I was going to fight it with everything I had. The first call I made the next morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor, wasn't to my mother. It wasn't to my sister. It was to a man named Arthur Vance. The most ruthless corporate lawyer in the city. A friend had given me his number years ago with the words, "You only call this guy if you're ready to go to war." I met him at his office at 9. I didn't tell him the whole emotional backstory. I didn't need to. I just laid out the documents, my business incorporation. The loan agreement the bank had emailed me. The default notice. He read everything in silence, his face impassive. When he was done, he took off his glasses and looked at me. "Your father committed fraud." "Michael," he said simply, "using an expired power of attorney from a trust to secure a commercial loan against a business you solely own, that's not just a civil matter. That's a criminal one." He paused. "We can protect your business. We can countersue for damages. But I need to know how far you're willing to take this." I thought of the 10-year-old boy with the wrench, the 18-year-old who gave up his dream, the 35-year-old man who almost lost everything because he just wanted his family to love him. I looked the lawyer in the eye. "How far?" I said. "All the way." Walking out of that law office, the city felt different. The noise of the traffic, the people rushing by. It all seemed distant. For the first time in my entire life, the only voice I was listening to was my own, and it was telling me one thing: never again. The first and final move was a letter. Not from me, but from my lawyer. It was a cold, beautiful piece of legal prose that Arthur Vance had drafted with the precision of a surgeon. It was a cease and desist, a formal notice of disassociation, and a clear, legally binding warning. It detailed the fraudulent loan, laid out the potential criminal charges, and then offered a simple, one-time deal. They would sign a document legally absolving me and my business of any and all of their debts. Past, present, and future. And in return, I would not press charges. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a judgment. It was a restraining order for my entire life. They signed it within 24 hours. And then, quiet. For 6 months. The world kept turning. The seasons changed. and I built the new garage. Michael's Auto Center opened in the spring. It was clean, bright, and busy from day one. I hired 2 good mechanics, a front desk manager. I was a boss, a business owner, not just a guy in a garage, but a man who had built something real. I heard about their fate through the family grapevine, the quiet whispers from cousins who had started reaching out again. They'd lost the house. The bank had foreclosed, just as they'd feared. My father, Robert, had apparently found a job driving for a delivery service. My mother was working part-time as a receptionist. And Jessica had gotten a 9-to-5 job in retail. For the first time in her life, she had a boss. There was a part of me that should have felt something pity. Maybe a flash of triumph. Even. But honestly, I just felt distant. Their life was a story happening in another town. To characters I used to know. My story was here. In the smell of new tires and fresh coffee in the waiting room. In the satisfying hum of a well-run business. In the respect I saw in my employees' eyes. One evening, I was closing up late, sitting alone in my new, clean office, looking out at the empty service bays gleaming under the lights. It was in that quiet moment that I thought about the man I used to be. The kid sitting alone in his old, cramped garage, eating cold noodles and feeling like a zero, wondering what he'd done wrong. If I could send a message back in time to him, I know what I'd say. I'd tell him, one day, you might get the apology you think you need. Or maybe you won't. But it won't feel the way you imagine. An apology isn't a magic eraser. It can't undo the years you spent feeling invisible. It can't patch the holes in your self-esteem where their approval was supposed to go. It's like someone apologizing for giving you a scar. You can accept the apology, but the scar is still there. But listen, the magic isn't in their apology. The magic happens the moment you realize you don't need it to feel whole anymore. You've already done the hard work of healing yourself, from the inside out. And that scar? It's not a symbol of your pain anymore. It's proof of your strength. It's a map of where you've been. And a reminder that you survived. And that is the only vindication that will ever truly matter. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Michael, it's your mother. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I read the words, 6 months too late and a lifetime short. I thought I would feel something. Anger. Relief. Something. But there was nothing. It was like reading a weather report from a city I no longer lived in. I didn't need their apology. I had already healed. I put the phone down without replying. The next morning, the permanent sign for the new building was delivered. A big, beautiful metal sign that read, Michael's Auto Center. I spent an hour on a ladder, bolting it to the front of the building myself. As I tightened the last bolt, I stepped back onto the pavement and looked up. My name, my business, my foundation. For years, I thought my last name defined me. I thought being their son, being a part of their family, was my identity. I was wrong. My identity wasn't something I was given, it was something I had to build. One bolt, one wrench, one hard-won boundary at a time. And standing there, looking at what I had created, I finally felt at peace. They hadn't written my story. They were just a complicated, painful prologue. My real story started now. Story 2. The words hit me before the soda did. You don't have a place here. My 9-year-old nephew, Jacob, shouted it with all the righteous fury a kid can muster. The plastic cup of Coca-Cola in his hand wasn't just a drink, it was a verdict. He tipped it, and the cold, sticky liquid cascaded onto my jeans, soaking through to my skin in an instant. For a second, there was a stunned silence, and then, the laughter started. Not just a chuckle. It was a wave. A full-throated, rolling burst of amusement from my mother. Susan. A sharp, barking laugh from my father. Michael. And the worst one, The smug, "I told you so" chortle from my older brother, Justin. They laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. My humiliation was the punchline. I didn't say a word. I just stood there for a beat. The cold of the soda seeping into my leg. The sound of their laughter echoing in the warm, festive air of my grandmother's birthday party. Then I turned, walked through the living room, past the half-eaten cake and the discarded wrapping paper, and straight out the front door. No one called after me. No one said, "Wait." No one stopped the joke. The drive home was quiet. The inside of my truck felt like a vacuum-sealed chamber, completely silent except for the low hum of the engine. It was a stark contrast to the house I'd just left, which was practically vibrating with forced holiday cheer and the sound of my family enjoying themselves at my expense. I glanced down at the dark, wet stain spreading across my thigh. It was already starting to feel sticky as it dried. A Coke stain. It seemed so small, so childish. But sitting there in the dark, it felt like more. It felt like a physical manifestation of my role in that family. An accidental spill. An inconvenient mess that everyone else could laugh at and walk away from. I'd spent my entire life feeling like a guest in my own family. But I'd never had it spelled out so clearly. "You don't have a place here." The words of a 9-year-old. Sure. But he'd learned them somewhere. Kids are just parrots who repeat the ugliest truths they overhear. And he'd learned that particular truth from his father. My brother. The golden child. Justin. And Justin had learned it from our parents. It was a lesson passed down through the family. A piece of unspoken knowledge that I was the only one who wasn't supposed to understand. I was Evan. The other son. The one who didn't go to business school. The one who got his hands dirty for a living. I was a welder. A good one. I owned my own small custom fabrication shop. I built things: gates, railings, sculptures. Things that were solid and real and would last 100 years. But in their eyes, I just played with fire and metal in a dusty garage. I wasn't a success story they could tell their friends at the country club. I wasn't Justin. Justin sold something. Software solutions. I think. It was one of those vague, important-sounding jobs where he wore expensive suits, flew to conferences, and used words like synergy and disruption without a trace of irony. He had the perfect wife, the perfect son, Jacob, the soda assassin, and the perfect life, funded by a salary that never seemed to quite cover his expenses. A gap my parents were always happy to fill. My successes were measured in millimeters. In the perfect seam of a weld. In a client satisfaction. His were measured in car leases and vacation photos. And in our family, the scoreboard was always tilted in his favor. I pulled into the driveway of my small rented house. The one I paid for myself. With money I earned from work they didn't respect. I killed the engine and just sat there in the dark. The stain on my pants had turned stiff. A dark patch in the faint glow of a street lamp. It wasn't just a stain anymore. It was a mark. A brand. A reminder that no matter what I built for myself, in their house, I would always be the one they were willing to spill on. And as I finally got out of the truck and walked towards my own front door, act cold. Quiet thought began to form in my mind. It wasn't loud or angry. It was calm. And clear. And sharp as a new saw blade. They were right. I didn't have a place there. So it was time I started building my own. And I knew exactly where the foundation would be. That night, sleep didn't come. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the laughter. It's a funny thing about family. You can spend years building up a tolerance to the small slights, the little paper cuts of neglect. You tell yourself it's not personal. That's just how they are. You build a callus over the wound. But then a moment like that comes along. And it doesn't just cut you. It rips the old wounds wide open. It wasn't just about a spilled drink. It was about the years of accumulated evidence that all pointed to the same conclusion. I was the family's afterthought. I remembered my high school graduation. Justin's a few years earlier had been a massive party with a hired caterer. For mine, My parents said they were proud, and then asked if I could help my dad clean out the gutters that weekend. When I won first place in a statewide metalworking competition for a sculpture I'd spent 6 months creating, my dad glanced at the trophy and said, "Who? At least it'll make a decent doorstop." A month later, Justin closed his first big sale at work, a completely average part of his job, and my parents took out a full-page ad in the local paper to congratulate him. It was a constant, grinding comparison, where I always came up short. He was the investment, I was the expense. He was the success story, I was the cautionary tale. It's funny. You read about this stuff. This idea in family psychology called assigned roles. It says that to keep a family system, especially a dysfunctional one, in balance, people get cast in certain parts without even knowing it. There's always the hero or the golden child, the one who carries all the family's hopes and is the living embodiment of their pride. That was Justin. His every achievement was a victory for the family. And to balance him out, there had to be the scapegoat, the one who gets all the blame, the criticism, the one who's pointed to as the source of any problem. That was me. The scapegoat exists, so the hero can shine brighter. He exists so the parents have somewhere to dump all their own quiet disappointments about their own lives. Breaking free from that role isn't just moving out. It's an act of rebellion. It's tearing up a script that was written for you before you could even read. And lying there, I realized that every time I had swallowed their disappointment, I was just playing my part. Every time I stayed quiet, I was helping them keep their broken system in balance. The party wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the clearest, most brutal line of dialogue they'd ever delivered. But what really solidified the decision, what turned the slow burn of resentment into a cold, hard plan, was the memory of a phone call from a few weeks back. It was my grandma. Her voice was thin, worried. She'd mentioned a letter from the bank. Something about the mortgage. She said Justin was handling it, that my parents had given him the money to make sure everything was taken care of. "He's so good with finances," she'd said, trying to reassure herself. But I knew Justin. I knew his finances. I'd seen the posts on his social media, the weekend trip to a ski resort, the new designer watch, the celebratory dinners at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He wasn't handling it. He was spending it. He was taking the money meant to secure our grandmother's home, the very home where I was just told I didn't belong, and he was lighting it on fire to fuel his own ego. That was the final piece. This wasn't just about my own hurt anymore. This was about him. About all of them. Letting their precious golden child's carelessness threaten the one person in the family who had always treated me with simple, uncomplicated kindness. They were so blinded by the script they'd written that they couldn't see the real villain of the story. They were so busy laughing at the scapegoat that they didn't realize the hero was robbing them blind. That's when the anger finally faded, replaced by something colder, quieter, a sense of purpose. I wasn't going to have a screaming match. I wasn't going to send a long, angry text. That's what they expected. That was in the script. No. I was going to do what I do best. I was going to build something. But this time, I wasn't going to use metal and fire. I was going to use their own arrogance, their own negligence. Asmirav materials. And I was going to build a trap. The next morning, the world didn't feel different. But I did. There was no hangover of sadness. No bitter aftertaste of humiliation. There was just a quiet, humming energy under my skin. I didn't stay in bed. I didn't call a friend to vent. I went to the one place where I made sense, my shop. My shop isn't pretty. It's a rented cinderblock garage in an industrial park, tucked away behind a lumber yard and a discount tire center. It smells of ozone, hot metal, and grinding fluid. To my family, it's probably the physical proof of my failure to launch. To me, it's a kingdom. Every tool hanging on the pegboard wall has its place. Every stack of raw steel is organized by gauge. Every surface is coated in a fine layer of metallic dust that glitters in the morning light. This is a place of order, of creation, of tangible results. You can't lie to a piece of steel. It either holds a weld, or it doesn't. There are no politics, no favorites, just physics and skill. I had a big project to finish, an ornate, custom-designed gate for an architect's new home. It was the most complex piece I'd ever been commissioned to do, full of intricate, curving lines that had to be bent and welded to within a millimeter of the design. For the next 8 hours, that's all I did. I lost myself in the work, in the intense blue-white glare of the TIG welder. The world shrank down to the tip of a tungsten electrode and the molten pool of metal I was guiding. It was a form of meditation. Each perfectly laid bead, each seamless joint, was a tiny act of defiance. It was a statement: I am good at this. This has value. I have value. Around 4 in the afternoon, the client, a man named Mr. Peterson, came by to see the finished gate. He was an older man with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. He walked around the massive steel structure, running his hand over the joints, examining the finish, his expression unreadable. I held my breath. My entire operating budget for the next 2 months was tied up in this single job. Finally, he stopped, turned to me, and a slow smile spread across his face. "It's better than the drawings," he said, his voice quiet with genuine appreciation. "The craftsmanship, it's flawless. Evan, truly." He pulled out a checkbook. He didn't just pay me the final amount we'd agreed on, he added a 20% bonus. "For excellence," he explained, handing me the check. The number on it made my head spin. It was more money than I'd ever held in my hand at one time. But he wasn't done. "I'm building a new commercial property downtown next year," he said, pulling on his gloves. "I'll need extensive custom metalwork staircases, railings, facade elements. The contract will be worth at least 10 times this one. It's yours if you want it." He didn't ask for a bid. He didn't ask to see other work. He just offered it. Because he'd seen the gate. He'd seen the proof. I stood there for a long time after he left, just holding the check, the weight of it feeling impossibly heavy and light at the same time. This was what it felt like. Recognition. Not the hollow, conditional approval my family rationed out, but real respect, earned through skill. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from the moment. I glanced at it. It was a notification from Instagram. A new post from Justin. I clicked it open. There he was. My brother, standing on the deck of a yacht, a champagne flute in his hand. A beautiful woman laughing beside him. The background was a perfect blue ocean. The caption read, "You have to reward the hustle. Number work hard, play hard, number blessed." The hustle. I looked from the photo of his borrowed luxury back to the check in my hand. A check I'd earned with sweat and burns and calloused fingers. The injustice of it was so sharp, so clear. It almost took my breath away. He was toasting his hustle with the money that was supposed to save our grandmother's house. The simmering anger from the party, the quiet determination that had been building all day, finally cooled and hardened into something else entirely. It wasn't hot rage anymore. It was cold steel. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about getting even. It was about rebalancing the scales. It was about taking the world they'd built on lies and favoritism and shaking it until the foundations cracked. I walked over to my workbench, set the check down carefully, and picked up my phone. I didn't scroll through my contacts. I opened a web browser and typed the name of the best financial lawyer in the city. The time for waiting for fairness was over. The time for creating it had begun. The lawyer I found wasn't one of those guys on a billboard. Her name was Anya Albright, and her office was a small, brutally efficient space on the 7th floor of a downtown high-rise. It had the kind of view that made you feel like you could see the whole city. Every moving part. Every connected street. It felt appropriate. I walked in wearing my work jeans and a clean shirt, still feeling the ghost of metallic dust on my skin. I laid it all out for her. Not the emotional backstory. Not the years of slights. Just the facts. My grandmother's mortgage. The missed payments. My brother's financial irresponsibility. The check from Mr. Peterson. My own savings. I want to buy the debt. I finished. Both the mortgage and my brother's car loan. I want to be the one holding the paper. She listened, her face giving away nothing. She steepled her fingers, her gaze sharp. This is an unusual request. Mr. She paused, looking at my file. Evan. It's aggressive. It's also perfectly legal. She explained the process. The banks holding the loans were likely losing money on them every month. A non-performing asset. They'd probably be happy to sell them, to cut their losses, especially if they were offered a lump sum in cash. But you can't do it as you. She warned. You'll need a shield. An entity. A limited liability company. It makes the transaction clean. Anonymous. Good, I said. I want to be a ghost. This is your entire life savings, she asked, looking at the bank statements I'd brought. Everything. She nodded slowly. All right. Let's build a ghost. The 2 weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and tension. We created Foundation Holdings LLC. The name felt right. I was buying the very foundation of the family home. The one they said I had no place in. While Ms. Albright's office began the delicate dance of negotiating with the banks. I went to my own bank and did the single most terrifying thing I'd ever done. I drained my accounts. Every dollar I had scraped together over 10 years of grueling work. Every penny saved by eating cheap and working late. Including the entirety of Mr. Peterson's check. It all went into a single cashier's check made out to the LLC. Looking at my bank balance, a number I had obsessed over, nurtured, and watched grow with painstaking effort, reduced to almost zero, felt like stepping off a cliff. The days crawled by. I tried to work, but my focus was shot. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart hammered in my chest. Expecting a call from Ms. Albright. The bank holding my grandmother's mortgage was eager to sell. They'd been trying to get Justin to negotiate for months with no success. They sold the debt to Foundation Holdings for 60 cents on the dollar. The car loan was trickier. It wasn't in default yet. But it was close. After a week of back and forth, they finally agreed. The day I went in to sign the final transfer documents, the city was gray and overcast. I sat across from Ms. Albright in her sterile conference room. A mountain of paper between us. This was it. The point of no return. I picked up the pen, the cheap plastic feeling heavy in my hand. I thought about Jacob's voice, my mother's laughter, my brother's smug smile. I thought about the cold, lonely drive home. I thought about my grandmother, her worried voice on the phone. And I thought about my workshop, the one place I felt whole. I signed my name. Again and again. With each signature, I wasn't just authorizing a legal transfer. I was taking back control. I was ending the part of the story where I was the victim, and starting a new chapter, the one where I held the pen. When it was done, Ms. Albright gathered the papers into a neat stack. It's done, she said. Her voice matter of fact, but her eyes held a spark of something new: respect. Foundation Holdings LLC is now the sole creditor for both properties. The banks will notify the debtors of the change in the coming days. The next move, she said, pushing a folder across the table to me, is yours. I walked out of that building and back into the gray afternoon. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound, almost unnerving calm. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the echo of their own actions to finally reach them. And I knew it wouldn't be long. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning. I was at the shop, calibrating a plasma cutter, when my phone, which I'd left on the workbench, started to vibrate violently. It was my mother. I ignored it. It rang again immediately. I ignored it again. Then came the text. A string of frantic, misspelled words. Call me now. Something terrible happened to Justin. I felt a cold, quiet hum in my chest. The first echo. I wiped my hands on a rag, took a slow sip of my coffee, and called her back. Evan, she practically shrieked into the phone. Thank God. You will not believe what they did. I kept my voice flat. Neutral. What? Who did? Mom. The bank, or the dealership. Or whoever, they came and took his car, towed it right out of his driveway in front of all the neighbors. Justin is humiliated. He's a wreck. I pictured it. The sleek, overpriced SUV he couldn't afford, the one he'd bragged about for months, being hoisted onto a tow truck. The shame. The curtain-twitching neighbors. Why did they do that, I asked. As if I didn't know the answer down to the penny. Well, it's obviously some kind of horrible mistake, she said, her voice rising in indignation. Justin said he was maybe a few days late on one payment. But he's been so stressed with work. This is what these predatory companies do. They prey on good people. Good people. I let the phrase hang in the air. That's terrible, I said. The words felt like foreign objects in my mouth. I know your father is furious. He's talking to his lawyer. We're all meeting at Grandma's tonight to figure out how to help him. You'll come. Won't you? He needs his family right now. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with my plasma torch. He needed his family. Sorry. Mom. I'm swamped here. A big new contract. Can't make it. There was a pause. A flicker of annoyance in her voice. You're always so busy with that shop. Evan, this is your brother. I know, I said. Tell him, I hope he figures it out. I hung up before she could reply. For the rest of the day, my phone was a constant, buzzing source of secondhand panic. Texts from Justin. Mom said she talked to you. You know this is BS. Right, the bank is screwing me. Texts from my dad. Evan. Call me. We need to present a united front on this. A missed call from an unknown number that I knew was my father trying to get around the fact that I wouldn't pick up for him. I ignored it all. I put on my welding helmet, and the world dissolved into a focused point of brilliant light. The frantic buzzing of my phone was just a faint, distant annoyance, easily drowned out by the hiss of the torch and the roar of the ventilation fan. They were in their world. A whirlwind of drama and self-inflicted crises. I was in mine. A world of control, precision, and tangible work. They were talking about how to fix a problem. I was the one who had written the equation. I could picture the scene at Grandma's house that night. The righteous anger. My father, Michael, pacing the living room, talking about lawsuits he'd never file. My mother, Susan, fussing over Justin, bringing him his favorite snacks as if he were a sick child. And Justin, the center of it all, performing his role as the tragic victim of a cruel, unfair system. They would rally around him. They would pool their money. They would coddle his ego and validate his irresponsibility. It's what they always did. They were so focused on the first storm, on the single dark cloud that had appeared in their perfect sky, that they had absolutely no idea the hurricane was still 5 miles offshore. They didn't know that the repossession of the car was just an appetizer. It was a distraction. It was the magician showing them a coin in his right hand, while his left hand was preparing the real trick. That night, as I was locking up the shop, I saw one last text message had come through. It was from my father. We've decided to pay off the car for Justin. This is what families do for each other. We take care of our own. I smiled. I put my phone in my pocket and looked up at the dark sky. A light rain was beginning to fall. I knew that somewhere across town, a postal worker had just delivered a certified letter to my grandmother's mailbox. It would sit there overnight. Quiet. Unassuming paper bomb. Waiting for morning. They thought taking care of family meant throwing money at the favorite son. They were about to learn what it meant when the other son decided to take care of the family's foundation. The letter sat in the mailbox all night. A crisp white rectangle waiting in the dark. The next morning, My father, Michael, went out to get the paper, still full of self-righteous fury about Justin's car. I can picture him seeing it. A certified letter. The kind of mail that is never good news. The kind that requires a signature and immediately puts a knot in your stomach. He would have taken it inside. His bravado from the night before deflating slightly. Back in the kitchen, the mood was probably somber, but defiant. They'd likely been up half the night, strategizing how to fight the bank and restore Justin's honor. Or at least his line of credit. My father would have placed the letter on the table. My mother, Susan. I would have looked at it with suspicion. What is it? It's for Mom. He'd say. But it looks official. He would have torn it open, his annoyance quickly turning to confusion, and then to a pale, cold dread as he read the words. I know the legal jargon Ms. Albright used. It would have been dense, professional, and utterly ruthless. Notice of debt acquisition. The mortgage note for the property at has been legally acquired by the creditor, Foundation Holdings LLC. The aforementioned loan is currently in arrears. A full payment of the outstanding balance is required within 30 days to avoid the commencement of foreclosure proceedings. He would read it out loud, his voice faltering. The reaction would have been instantaneous. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. The car was a luxury, an embarrassment. This was the house, the family home, the place where they hosted Christmas, where my grandmother had lived for 50 years. It was the bedrock. What does that mean? My mother would gasp. What is Foundation Holdings? Is this even legal? Justin would be defensive. Cornered. I was going to make a payment, I just needed a little more time. The bank must have sold the loan to some vulture fund. This is their fault. They would have seized on that explanation. It was easier. It kept the blame outside the family. It was another faceless, predatory corporation, kicking them when they were down. They'd see themselves as victims. Twice over. My father, in his typical fashion, would try to take charge, to wrestle the problem into submission. This is ridiculous. He'd boom. They can't just do this. I'm calling Bob. Or lawyer. He'll sort this out. We'll sue them. And that would be the moment. The beautiful, terrible, inevitable moment I had been waiting for. I can hear the phone call in my head. My father. On speakerphone, for the whole family to hear. Barking into the receiver. Bob. It's Michael. We've got a big problem. Some faceless corporation is trying to steal my mother's house out from under her. He'd explain the situation, his voice full of bluster, expecting the lawyer to offer a simple solution. A legal loophole. But there would be a pause on the other end of the line. The sound of a keyboard clicking. Foundation Holdings LLC. You said the lawyer would ask. That's right. Some bottom-feeding vulture fund that bought the debt. We need to know our options. Can we fight this? More clicking. A longer pause. The lawyer would clear his throat. Michael. He'd begin. His voice suddenly different. Cautious. This isn't a vulture fund from out of state. I've just pulled the public registration documents. Well, who is it? My father would demand. Impatient. Who are these people? And then, the lawyer would deliver the final, devastating line. The one that would change everything. Michael, Foundation Holdings LLC was incorporated 2 months ago. It's a local company. A beat of silence. And according to this filing, the sole registered agent, the only owner, is your son, Evan. And then, nothing. Only the sound of dead air on the speakerphone. The sound of a world tilting on its axis. I can picture their faces. My father. His face draining of all color. The phone slipping slightly in his hand. My mother. Her hand flying to her mouth. A silent, horrified gasp. And Justin. Justin's face. A mask of utter, gut-wrenching disbelief. The slow-motion implosion of the golden child, realizing the scapegoat he'd dismissed his entire life had just checkmated the entire family. The car wasn't a mistake. The letter wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't bad luck. This was a plan. Meticulous. Cold. And carried out in complete silence. The person they thought was weakest, the one they had literally told, had no place in their home, now owned it. The power hadn't just shifted. It had been conquered. They were standing in my house. It took them 2 days. 2 days for the shock to curdle into rage. 2 days to convince themselves that they were the victims. When they finally came for me, they came together. A united front of wounded pride. I heard their car pull up. In the crunch of tires on the gravel outside my shop, too aggressive to be a client, the door to the workshop flew open, banging against the interior wall. And there they were, my father. Michael. His face a thundercloud. My mother. Susan. Clutching her purse like it was a shield. And my brother. Justin. Standing behind them. His expression a pathetic mix of anger and fear. I was in the middle of a weld, joining 2 pieces of 1/4-inch steel. Sparks showered onto the concrete floor. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal. I saw them standing there in the harsh fluorescent light. Saw their mouths moving. But I couldn't hear them over the high-frequency hum of the welder. I didn't stop. I kept my helmet down, my hand steady, and finished the bead. I let them wait. I let them stand in my world. On my terms. Surrounded by the noise and the fire and the work they never understood. Finally, I finished the seam, killed the torch, and flipped up my helmet. The sudden silence was deafening. What? My father's voice boomed, filling the quiet. Is the meaning of this? I took my time, setting the torch on its hook, removing my gloves. I looked at them. 3 perfectly manicured suburbanites, standing in a place of dirt and labor. Looking completely out of their element. You're going to have to be more specific, I said. My voice calm. Don't play dumb with us. Evan, my mother snapped. This scheme. Buying your grandmother's house from under her, how could you be so cruel? Cruel. I walked over to the sink, turned on the tap, and began washing the grime from my hands. Let's talk about cruel. Is it cruel when your family laughs while your nephew humiliates you? Is it cruel when you're told to your face that you don't have a place in your own home? That was a joke, Justin chimed in from the back. Jacob is a kid. You're destroying our family over a joke. I turned off the water and faced them, drying my hands slowly. This isn't about the joke. Justin. It was never about the joke. It was about the laughter. It was about the fact that for my entire life, you have all made it abundantly clear that I am the lesser son. The backup. The disappointment. I looked at my parents, and I was fine with it. I accepted it. I built my own life, away from all of you. But then you let him. I nodded at Justin. Let his carelessness threaten Grandma's home. The one thing that was supposed to be safe. We gave him the money to handle it, my father insisted. And he spent it on watches and vacations. Did you ever once check, or did you just assume the golden child could do no wrong? They had no answer for that. The truth was a heavy, awkward silence in the room. This is revenge. Evan, my mother said, her voice shaking. Pure and simple. We raised you better than this. I almost laughed. You didn't raise me to be this. You raised me to be quiet, to accept my place, to swallow the insults, and never, ever rock the boat. I took a step toward them. But you know, the funny thing is, you were right. At the party, all of you, you were right. I didn't have a place there. I gestured around the workshop at the heavy machinery. The blueprints tacked to the wall. The finished pieces of metalwork gleaming under the lights. The physical evidence of my labor and my success. So when you made it clear I didn't have a place in that house, I realized I needed to build my own foundation. Something solid. Something real. Something that no one could take away from me. I met my father's furious gaze. my mother's tear-filled eyes, my brother's shocked expression. "And now," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady calm, "the foundation of your entire family is standing on my property." The words landed in the silence and shattered it. There was nothing left to say. There was no argument. No defense. No loophole. It was just the truth. Hard and unyielding as the steel on my workbench. They had made the rules. For the first time in my life, I had simply played the game better. I watched them stand there, their anger deflating into a kind of stunned, helpless despair. I turned my back on them, picked up my gloves, and slid my helmet back down. The conversation was over. I had work to do. They left. I didn't watch them go. I just heard the sound of their car doors slamming shut, one after the other, followed by the engine starting and the sound of tires spitting gravel as they pulled away. I stood there in the ringing silence of my workshop, the air still tasting of anger and ozone. I had won. I held all the cards. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt quiet. The quiet of a battlefield after the fighting is over. Later that night, I didn't celebrate. I sat on a stool in my shop, the place that felt more like home than any house I'd ever lived in, and made a phone call. Not to them. To my grandmother. She picked up on the second ring. Evan, her voice was small. "Hi. Grandma," I said, my own voice softer than I expected. "I need you to hear this from me. You are safe. You are not losing your home. Nothing is going to change for you." She was quiet for a long moment, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "They told me what you did," she said. "Your mother, she's—" "I know," I interrupted gently, "and that's between me and them. But you and I are separate. You can stay in your house as long as you want. All I ask is that from now on, any business related to the house goes through my lawyer. That's the only change." It was the boundary, the new wall, clear, simple, and non-negotiable. "Okay. Evan," she whispered. "Thank you." We talked for a few more minutes about her garden, about a book she was reading. Normal things. When we hung up, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My mother did call. The next day. Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was defeated. Pleading. "Evan, we're sorry." An apology. The words I had spent a lifetime craving. And now that they were here, they felt hollow. Like a currency from a country that no longer existed. "I appreciate the call, Mom," I said, my voice polite but distant. "Grandma knows she's safe. That was my priority. I have to get back to work now." I ended the call. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her tears. It was too late. That evening, sitting alone in the quiet of my shop, I thought about the kid I was just a year ago, sitting in his truck with cold soda soaking into his jeans, feeling like a complete and utter zero. If I could send a message back to him, I'd tell him this one day. "You'll get the apology you're starving for, but it won't be what you think. It's not a magic eraser that can wipe away 20-some years of feeling like you were the spare part. It can't patch the holes from all the nights you wondered, what was so wrong with you? It's like someone apologizing for giving you a scar. You can accept the apology, but the scar is still there. But here's the amazing part. The magic isn't in the apology they finally give you. The magic is in the moment you hear it. And you realize, with a kind of shocking clarity, that you don't need it anymore. You're not waiting for it to feel whole. You've already painstakingly glued the pieces of yourself back together. You've already done the work. That scar, you realize, isn't a symbol of your pain anymore. It's a testament to your strength. It's proof that you can heal yourself. And that, I thought, looking around at the solid, real world I had built with my own two hands, is the only vindication that matters. A few weeks later, I got the signed contract from Mr. Gation Peterson, the big one, the one that would secure my business for the next 2 years. As I was filing it away, a young kid from the local trade school I'd hired as a part-time apprentice looked over at a complex metal sculpture sitting in the corner. "Man," he said, his voice full of awe. "How did you even learn to build something like that?" I looked at the sculpture, then around at my shop. My kingdom built on a foundation of their doubt. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. A real smile. Not of triumph. Not of revenge. But of peace. "You just decide you have to," I said. "And you start from the ground up." Story 3. The world was ending. I was sure of it. I could hear it in the frantic, rhythmic beeping of the machines that were keeping my daughter alive. My Daisy. My sweet 6-year-old Daisy. Buried under a tangle of wires and tubes in a hospital bed that looked monstrously large around her tiny body. One minute, we were singing off-key to the radio. The next, a blur of metal and shattering glass. My phone buzzed. Cruel. Ordinary sound in the sterile silence of the ICU. It was my mother. Karen. Maybe she was coming. Maybe she was worried. I opened the message. "Bring cupcakes for Madison's party tomorrow." I read it again. And again. The words didn't make sense. Me fingers, numb and clumsy, typed back a message that felt like it was being dragged from the bottom of the ocean. "Daisy's in the ICU. Car accident. She's on life support." The reply was instant. "You always ruin everything with your drama." Then another from my sister. "Megan, stop being so dramatic. Kids get hurt." And finally, my father. "Richard, your niece's party is more important." I looked from the glowing screen to my daughter's pale, still face, and with a clarity that cut through the fog of my grief, I opened my contacts. Karen. Block. Richard. Block. Megan. Block. Before I tell you how a single text message about cupcakes led me to erase my entire family, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me know where you're watching from. Because this is a story about the moment I finally chose my daughter and myself. Growing up, our house was a stage, and everyone had a role. My father, Richard, was the stoic provider. My mother, Karen, was the flawless hostess, obsessed with how things looked to the neighbors. My younger sister, Megan, was the star, and I was the stagehand. The quiet, responsible one who made sure the lights stayed on and the curtain went up on time. Nobody ever noticed the stagehand. Not unless something went wrong. My 10th birthday is the first time I remember understanding my role with perfect, painful clarity. All I had wanted was a particular doll. The one all my friends had. Instead, I unwrapped a new edition of a history textbook. A few weeks later, Megan got a C- on a math test, and my parents threw her a lavish, "You tried so hard" party, complete with a pony for the afternoon. I remember my mother explaining it to my aunt at that party. Her voice, a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Sarah's the responsible one. She doesn't need all that fuss. She understands. But Megan, she's just so sensitive. She needs the encouragement." I didn't understand. I just learned that being responsible was another word for being invisible. My wants were complications. My needs were an inconvenience. Megan's feelings were the main event. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was the rhythm of our lives. The summers Megan went to art camp. I stayed home to babysit my cousins. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. "You're the oldest, Sarah," my father would say, not looking up from his newspaper. "It's your responsibility. Family helps family." But it never felt like helping. It felt like a job I was never paid for. A role I never auditioned for. The phrase family responsibility started to feel less like a virtue and more like a cage. It wasn't until years later that I found the words for it. A concept that explained everything. In psychology, the golden child, scapegoat system isn't really an expression of love. but a control mechanism used by insecure parents. The golden child is placed in a golden cage. They receive all the praise, but only as long as they follow the script. They exist to reflect the family's success. The scapegoat, on the other hand, is exiled to an emotional wasteland, blamed for all the family's problems and differences. But in that exile, a paradox happens. They find freedom. Freedom from the crushing weight of having to please. Ironically, the golden cage can be more suffocating than the land of exile, because the one in the cage never knows they have wings, while the one in exile is forced to learn how to fly. I spent my entire childhood learning how to fly in secret, because I knew no one was ever going to build me a runway. Every achievement I had was met with a quiet nod, while Megan's slightest effort was met with a parade. I learned to stop showing them my report cards. I learned to stop talking about my dreams. I learned to be small, to be quiet, to be useful. Because in my family, being useful was the only way to be seen at all. And I was very, very useful. I thought moving out would change things. It didn't. The cage just got bigger. When I had Daisy, my parents visited once in the hospital. My mother held her for 5 minutes, commented that she had my nose, unfortunately, and then they left. We're just so busy. You know how it is, she'd said. A year later, when Megan had her daughter, Madison, my mother took a 2-week leave of absence from work to help her settle in. My father was there every day, assembling cribs and installing car seats. They were a family. I was a satellite, occasionally in orbit, but never a part of the system. And my role as the family servant didn't end. It just evolved. I became Madison's second mother. It started slowly. Megan would call, her voice frantic. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. My babysitter just canceled. Can you watch Madison for just an hour? I have a huge meeting." An hour would turn into 5. A meeting would turn into drinks with friends. Then it became a regular occurrence. Friday nights, without fail, my doorbell would ring. Megan would be standing there, Madison on her hip, purse on her shoulder. "You're a lifesaver," she'd say, already halfway out the door. "I just need a night to myself." I never said no. How could I? I told myself I was doing it for Madison. I told myself I wanted Daisy and Madison to grow up like sisters, to have the bond Megan and I never did. But the truth, I was exhausted. I was a single mom working a full-time job. And every weekend, I was parenting 2 children instead of 1. I remember one night, after Megan had dropped Madison off for the 3rd time that week, I was just so tired. I tried to say something. "Meg, this is getting to be a lot." She cut me off with a laugh. "Oh, come on. You're so good at this. Sarah, Madison probably likes being here more than with me. Just think of it as practice." Practice. My life was practice for her convenience. I felt that familiar, bitter resignation settle in my chest. But then I looked at Daisy and Madison, playing together on the floor, their laughter filling my small apartment. And I swallowed my exhaustion. I told myself it was worth it. That was my mistake. I taught them that my boundaries didn't exist. I taught them that I would always be there to clean up their messes, no matter the cost to myself. I had no idea how high that cost would be. The day of the accident was beautiful. One of those perfect, crisp autumn days where the sun feels warm on your skin. Daisy had just gotten a gold star in her preschool class, and she was so proud. She insisted on holding it the entire car ride home. We were singing along to the radio, a silly pop song, and Daisy was giggling, trying to hit the high notes. "Louder, Mommy." "Louder," she squealed. I looked at her in the rearview mirror, her face bright with pure, uncomplicated joy, her gold star clutched in her little fist. In that moment, everything was perfect. I was just a mom. She was just my little girl. There was no family drama, no exhaustion, no resentment. There was only us. I turned my eyes back to the road. A smile on my face. The light ahead was green. I don't remember the sound first. I remember the feeling. A violent, world-shattering jolt from the side. The universe seemed to lurch sideways. There was a deafening crunch of metal. A spiderweb of cracks exploding across the windshield. The world spun. A nauseating kaleidoscope of blue sky and asphalt, and the terrifying tinkle of breaking glass. Then, silence. A ringing, hollow silence that was worse than the noise. My head was screaming. Everything hurt. But my only thought was Daisy. I twisted in my seat, my body screaming in protest. The back of the car was gone, crushed, unrecognizable. And my daughter, my little girl, was just a crumpled shape in the wreckage. Daisy, I whispered. My voice a broken thing. No answer. Daisy, I screamed, clawing at my seatbelt. Baby. Please. Answer, Mommy. But there was only silence. A terrible, final silence. The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of the hospital. I sat in a hard plastic chair outside the ICU. My clothes still stiff with dried blood, not mine, while a doctor spoke to me in a low, somber voice. Severe head trauma, he said. The words clinical and cold. We've put her on a ventilator to help her breathe. There's significant swelling. The next 24 hours are critical. Critical. The word echoed in the empty space of my mind. I nodded, but I couldn't form a response. All I could see was Daisy's face, pale and small, behind the glass door of the ICU. My phone had been buzzing nonstop, but I'd ignored it. I assumed it was my family. Finally worried. I thought maybe, just maybe, this tragedy would be the thing that finally made them see me. Made them see us. I was so wrong. I saw them before they saw me. My mother, Karen, and my sister, Megan, striding down the hallway like they were walking into a department store. Karen was in a stylish trench coat, her hair perfectly in place. Megan was on her phone, a bored expression on her face. There was no panic in their steps, no fear in their eyes, just annoyance. My mother spotted me, and her face tightened. She didn't rush to hug me. She didn't ask about Daisy. She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms, and looked me up and down with disapproval. Sarah, do you have any idea what time it is? Madison's teacher called me. She wanted to know about the cupcakes. You're making the entire family look unreliable. The words were so disconnected from my reality that for a second, I thought I was hallucinating. I thought the trauma had finally broken my brain. What was all I could manage to whisper? Megan sighed dramatically, finally looking up from her phone. Seriously, Sarah, Madison is going to be so disappointed. You promised you'd help with her class party. It's a really big deal for her. I stared at them. My child, their grandchild, their niece, was in a room 10 feet away, fighting for her life. And they were talking about cupcakes. They were talking about disappointing a 6-year-old at a school party. The sheer, breathtaking selfishness of it stole the air from my lungs. Mom, I said, my voice shaking. Daisy, she's on a ventilator. The doctor said she might not make it. I expected tears. I expected shock. I expected, at the very least, a flicker of human empathy. My mother just waved her hand dismissively, as if I were complaining about a scraped knee. Oh. Doctors always say the worst to protect themselves. She'll be fine. Kids are resilient. She then glanced around the waiting room, lowering her voice slightly. But the family's reputation isn't. We promised we'd contribute. What are people going to think if we don't even show up with a plate of cupcakes? I couldn't speak. I felt a cold, dead weight settle in my stomach. It wasn't that they didn't understand. It was that they didn't care. My tragedy was an inconvenience. My daughter's life was a footnote in their social calendar. The insight was so stark, so absolute. It was like being doused in ice water. They weren't here for me. They weren't here for Daisy. They were here for themselves. To manage an optics problem I had created by having the audacity to get into a car accident. Megan, oblivious, continued to scroll through her phone. "So, are you going to bake them tonight, or should I just tell everyone you flaked?" she asked, her thumb hovering over her screen. I looked at her. At this sister who shared my blood, but not an ounce of my heart. I looked at my mother. This woman whose approval I had spent my entire life trying to earn. And I realized I was looking at strangers. Worse than strangers. Strangers might have offered a kind word. A comforting touch. My family offered only demands. And judgment. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse. My mother's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "It's your father," she said. Her voice laced with an unspoken warning. She answered, putting it on speaker. "Karen, is Sarah there? Put her on." My mother held the phone out to me. I just shook my head, unable to speak. My father's voice, tinny and impatient, filled the silence. "Sarah, listen to me. Stop being selfish. Whatever is going on, your niece does not deserve to be disappointed because you can't get your act together. Fulfill your responsibility." Responsibility. Cupcakes. Disappointment. The words swirled in my head. A toxic cocktail of their priorities. And my daughter was dying. Something inside me didn't just break. It detonated. I lunged forward and snatched the phone from my mother's hand. Ending the call. Cupcakes. The word wasn't spoken. It was a scream. Raw and torn from a place of grief so deep, I didn't know it existed. Heads turned across the waiting room. A security guard took a step in our direction. Responsibility, I was shouting now. My whole body shaking with a fury I had suppressed for 30 years. My daughter is in that room. She might not ever wake up again. And you are talking to me about cupcakes. My mother's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than annoyance. Shock. Maybe even fear. But it didn't last. Her features hardened back into a mask of cold authority. "Stop making a scene in public," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You are always so dramatic. We are family. You have to know what to prioritize." We are family. That was the phrase. The magic words that were supposed to excuse everything. The justification for every demand. Every sacrifice. Every time I was expected to set myself on fire to keep them warm. And in that moment, I understood. There's a fine line between care and control. And that line is often erased by the word family. When someone says, "I'm doing this because I love you," right before asking you to give up your dream, or in my case, your sanity, that isn't love. That's manipulation in disguise. Real love expands your world. Control shrinks it down to fit someone else's expectations. Love asks, "What do you need?" Control dictates, "This is what you will do." Realizing that difference, that was the first step to freeing myself. The rage that had been consuming me moments before vanished, replaced by an ice-cold calm. The shaking stopped. He felt still. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, who was watching with wide, startled eyes. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the hospital noise like a scalpel. "I'm done." My mother's jaw tightened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, taking a step back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm that had just opened between us, "that from this moment on, you will get nothing from me. Not another phone call. Not another penny. Not another minute of my time. I am not your babysitter. I am not your maid. I am not your therapist." I looked straight into my mother's eyes. I am Daisy's mother. That is my only family now. And without waiting for a response, without another glance, I turned my back on them. I walked back toward the ICU. The sound of my own steady footsteps echoing in the hallway. I left them standing there in the middle of the waiting room, speechless, their perfect family portrait shattered into a million pieces. The heavy door to the ICU swung shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the waiting room. The adrenaline that had fueled my rage moments before evaporated, leaving me hollow and shaking. I stumbled back to the chair beside Daisy's bed and collapsed, burying my face in my hands. What had I just done? I had detonated my life. I had walked away from my mother, my sister, my father, my entire family. A fresh wave of sobs racked my body. But these weren't tears of grief for them. They were tears of terror and loneliness. I was completely, utterly alone. The quiet squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum made me look up. It was Nia. In the night nurse. She was holding a folded blanket and a bottle of water. She didn't say anything at first. Just gently placed the water on the small table beside me and draped the warm blanket over my trembling shoulders. The simple, human kindness of the gesture was so unexpected it made me cry harder. She pulled up a rolling stool and sat near me, her presence calm and steady in the chaotic storm of my emotions. "I heard some of that," she said. Her voice, a soft murmur that didn't disturb the quiet of the room. "I'm sorry you're going through this." I just shook my head, unable to speak. "But you need to hear this," she continued, leaning in slightly, her eyes full of a profound sincerity that commanded my attention. "You are not being dramatic. You are not overreacting. You are a mother protecting her child. Don't let anyone, tell you otherwise." Her words, they were like a life raft thrown to a drowning person. All my life, my feelings had been dismissed, labeled as too much or too sensitive. I had been trained to believe that my reactions were the problem, not the actions that caused them. To hear someone, a stranger, validate my pain so simply, so completely, it was everything. The sobs that came now were different. They were tears of relief. I thought I was going crazy. I managed to choke out. "No," she said firmly. "You're becoming sane in an insane situation." Nia was quiet for a moment, watching Daisy's monitors with a practiced eye. Then she surprised me. "My own mother. We haven't spoken in 5 years," she confessed, her voice dropping even lower. "She's one of those people who thinks love is a transaction. I had to choose between her approval and my own family's well-being. It was the hardest thing I ever did." She met my gaze, and it was the best thing I ever did for myself. And for my kids. Her story was a gift. It was a map. It showed me that this path I had just stumbled onto, this terrifying path of cutting ties, it was a path others had walked before. It was a path that could lead to peace. It wasn't a path of destruction. It was a path of self-preservation. A new feeling began to bloom in my chest, pushing aside the despair. It felt like resolve, like steel. Nia stood up to leave. "You get some rest if you can," she said gently. "You're her rock right now. You need to be strong." After she left, I picked up my phone. My hands were steady now. I went to my call log. Karen. Blocked. Richard. Blocked. Megan. Blocked. But I didn't stop there. I opened Facebook, found my mother's profile. With its cheerful cover photo of her perfect garden, I clicked the 3 dots. Block. Megan's profile, filled with glamorous selfies and pictures of Madison. Block. My father's, which he barely used but was still a connection. A digital thread tying me to him. Block. One by one, I severed every tie, every avenue they could use to inject their poison into my life, every digital doorway I had left open out of guilt or obligation. Islam shoot. When I was done, I put the phone down. The screen was dark, silent, for the first time in as long as I could remember. There was silence. No buzzing expectations. No guilt-tripping texts. No demands disguised as love. Just the steady, rhythmic beeping of my daughter's heart monitor. A sound that, for the first time all night. Sounded like hope. The next morning, the sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Daisy was still sleeping, but her breathing was calmer, steadier. The storm of the night before had passed, leaving a strange, quiet clarity in its wake. He felt calm, not happy, not relieved. Just a solid, centered calm I hadn't felt in years. I had drawn a line. The question now was how to hold it. The answer arrived in the form of a woman with a kind face and a clipboard. Her name was Maria, a social worker from the hospital's patient advocacy department. She pulled up a chair and spoke in a gentle, professional tone. Nia, the nurse on duty last night, made a note of the disturbance in the waiting area. She began. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing, and make sure you're aware of the resources available to you. I told her a shortened version of the story, leaving out the decades of backstory but focusing on their demands and my decision to cut contact. I fully expected a neutral, placating response. Instead, she looked at me with direct, unwavering eyes. First of all, she said, you need to know that you are in control here. As Daisy's mother and legal guardian, you have the absolute right to decide who can and cannot have access to her. She tapped her pen on the clipboard. That includes your family. If their presence is causing you or your daughter distress, we can officially add their names to a restricted visitors list. Security will not allow them past the front desk. It was like she had handed me a shield. I had spent my entire life feeling powerless. My space constantly invaded by their needs and their drama. The idea that I had the authority, the right to put up a wall, was a revelation. It was a boundary made of steel and policy, not just my own wavering resolve. Yes, I said, and the word came out clear and strong. Please do that. What are their names? She asked. Karen, Richard, and Megan, I said, without a single tremor in my voice. After Maria left, I sat in the quiet, the weight of that decision settling not as a burden, but as an anchor. I had done it. I had built the first real wall of my life. Staring at Daisy's sleeping face, I thought about all the years I'd spent twisting myself into pretzels to please them, desperate for a scrap of approval. I used to think they resented me, or even hated me for being different, for not being the cheerful, compliant daughter my sister was. But sitting there, in the profound silence of that hospital room, I realized something far more devastating. It wasn't hate. Hate, at least, is a form of recognition. It acknowledges your existence. No. What I had received from them was far worse. It was indifference. People often think the opposite of love is hate. But it's not. The opposite of love is indifference. Because hate is still a form of connection. It admits that you exist, that you matter enough to despise. But indifference, it's a quiet erasure. It turns you into a ghost in your own home. A piece of furniture that's only noticed when it's in the way. The journey of the forgotten one isn't about forcing others to finally see you. The journey is about seeing your own value, even when you're standing in the shadows. It's about realizing that you don't need their light to shine. My entire life had been a fight against being erased. And by cutting them off, I wasn't erasing them. I was finally, letting myself become visible. To myself, I reached out and gently touched Daisy's hand. Her fingers, impossibly small, curled instinctively around mine. This was real. This was visible. This was a connection that wasn't a transaction. I didn't need them to see me anymore. All that mattered was that she could. The days that followed were a quiet symphony of beeps and whispers. The storm had passed, leaving behind the slow, painstaking work of healing. For the first time, my focus wasn't divided. It was singular. It was Daisy. Her recovery was a series of tiny, breathtaking miracles. I remember the day they took her off the ventilator. I held my breath for what felt like an eternity, watching her small chest waiting. And then, she took a breath. A small, ragged inhale. All on her own. I sobbed so hard the nurse had to hold my shoulders to steady me. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A few days later, her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes were hazy, unfocused. But they found mine. She didn't speak. But I saw a flicker of recognition. A silent, "You're here." I felt my heart stitch itself back together. One thread at a time. And then, a week after the accident, as I was reading her a story from her favorite book, her lips parted. A tiny, hoarse sound escaped. Mama. The word was a prayer. An anchor. The only thing that mattered in the entire world. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, my tears dampening her hair. "I'm right here. Baby," I whispered. "Mama's here." As Daisy slowly regained her strength, I began, just as slowly, to build a new life. Nia, my guardian angel in scrubs, became a real friend. She'd stop by on her breaks, not just to check on Daisy, but to check on me. "There's a support group for parents on the pediatric floor," she told me one afternoon. "You should go. It helps to talk to people who get it." I was hesitant, but I went. And for the first time, I was in a room full of people who didn't see me as dramatic or selfish. They saw me as a mother who was scared. They listened. They shared their own stories. They understood. One of the moms in the group, a woman named Clara, told me about a small, 2-bedroom apartment that had just opened up in her building, just a 10-minute drive from the hospital. "It's not fancy," she'd warned, "but it's quiet. And the landlord is a good guy." It was perfect. A safe, clean, quiet space. That would be hours, and hours alone. A nest. I spent my evenings on the hospital's public Wi-Fi, making arrangements. I canceled the lease on my old, larger apartment, arranged for movers, and filed a change of address. With every form I filled out, I felt a layer of the old life sloughing off. I was discovering a version of myself I never knew existed: competent, decisive, and completely self-reliant. I wasn't just surviving, I was organizing my own rescue. The day Daisy was discharged was a Tuesday. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. There was no big, chaotic family gathering to greet us. No forced smiles or passive-aggressive comments. It was just me, helping my daughter, bundled in blankets, into a wheelchair. Nia met us at the hospital exit. She wasn't holding a balloon or a giant stuffed animal. She was holding a small bouquet of daisies. "For my favorite fighter," she said, handing them to my daughter. Then, she gave me a fierce, strong hug. "You've got this," she whispered in my ear. I knew she was right. As we drove away from the hospital, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Daisy was in her car seat, clutching her flowers, her face turned toward the sun. We didn't go back to the house I'd shared with all the ghosts of my past. We drove to our new apartment. The rooms were empty, echoing with possibility. I carried Daisy inside, and she looked around, her eyes wide with a child's simple wonder. I set her down gently on the living room floor, and she patted the empty space beside her. I sat down, and for the first time in weeks, we just breathed together, in our own home, in our own quiet peace. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't a house designed to impress the neighbors. It was a sanctuary, and it was ours. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet. Ordinary. Beautiful life. Our little apartment became a home, filled with the smell of cinnamon from our Saturday morning pancakes and the sound of Daisy's laughter, which was the best music in the world. I found a remote job as a project coordinator, a position that offered the flexibility I needed as a single mom. It didn't pay a fortune, but it paid our bills, and it was mine. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for school and work. Afternoons were for the park, and evenings were for stories and cuddles. Life was simple. And for the first time, it was peaceful. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen, our hands dusted with flour, making cupcakes. Just because we felt like it, Daisy was carefully adding sprinkles, more ending up on the floor than on the frosting. And her face was a study in pure concentration. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very thing that had shattered my old life had become a symbol of my new one. An act of joy. Not obligation. My phone rang. It was a distant aunt I hadn't spoken to in years, calling to catch up. After a few minutes of pleasantries, she lowered her voice. "I suppose you've heard things are a bit chaotic back home," she said, her tone hesitant. I told her I hadn't. "Well?" she sighed. "Megan is having a terrible time with Madison. Without you there to, help out. She's realizing how much work a child actually is. She's had to cut her hours at work." She continued. "And your mother? All she does is complain. That no one helps her anymore. That the house is a mess. Your father is just angry all the time. It's like the whole system just collapsed when you left." I listened. A strange mix of sadness and detachment washing over me. There was no joy in hearing about their struggles. No sense of victory. There was just a quiet, profound finality. They weren't struggling because I had left. They were struggling because they were finally being forced to carry the weight of their own lives. A weight I had been carrying for them for decades. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I meant it. I was sorry they were in pain. But I wasn't sorry I had saved myself. After the call, I sat on our small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I didn't regret my decision. Not for a second. Leaving them hadn't just been an act of self-preservation. It had been the only path to force them, and myself, to grow. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own choices. Daisy came outside and curled up in my lap, her head resting on my shoulder. She was quiet for a moment, watching the colors fade from the sky. "Mommy," she asked, her voice small, "why don't we see Grandma Karen anymore?" I held her a little tighter, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. I had thought about this question, known it would come eventually, and I had promised myself I would always be honest with her. In a way, my family had never been with me. Because, "Sweetie," I said, my voice soft but sure, "Mommy is learning how to build a family that only has joy in it. A family where everyone is kind, and everyone feels safe." I kissed the top of her head. "And that's what we have now. You and me. We're a family." She nodded, accepting my answer with the simple, profound trust of a child. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. We had our own table now. It was small, but it was sturdy. And it was built with love. My story started with a car crash. But the real wreckage wasn't the twisted metal on the side of the road. It was the collapsed foundation of a family that was built on obligation instead of love. For years, I thought my only value was in how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, one day they would finally see me. But the day they demanded cupcakes, while my daughter's life hung in the balance, I finally understood. I could have baked 1,000 cupcakes. It never would have been enough. I've learned that sometimes, building your own table is more valuable than being invited to someone else's. And I've learned that a family isn't something you're born into by default. It's something you build. You build it with trust, with respect, and with unconditional love. It's the people who show up for you in the ICU, not the ones who text you demands. The hardest part wasn't walking away. The hardest part was finally believing that I deserved peace. That my daughter deserved a mother who wasn't constantly broken by the people who were supposed to build her up. The truth, even when it's ugly and painful, is the only thing that can set you free. Free from the roles you were assigned. Free from the expectations that were never really about you. And free to finally, truly, be yourself. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to make a painful choice to protect yourself or the people you love? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And please, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you believe that everyone deserves a seat